behind. When all the world seems in tune, and love goes on softly on. So don't be sighing or crying, dear, if winter comes.
All right, welcome to another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. I'm Scott R. Kaufman.
I'm Steve Atwell.
And we're going to be talking about Game of Thrones, first of his name, the latest episode. And one thing I wanted to address before we actually started the podcast proper, because I very rarely watch these when they're live on HBO, and I did this time, and wow, the previously on.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got Ned, we got Kat, we got
some deep cuts.
Who are these people? I mean, it looks like it's on different film stock. I mean, it was sort of amazing, and
kind of two minds about it. Like, some people think that it overly telegraphs things, whereas I've heard other arguments that when you're dealing with a TV show audience with now like 3 years of back continuity, that you kind of need to remind your ordinary viewer who Jon Arryn is and why he's important.
Well, I mean, and we've discussed previously his importance, and we'll touch on it again today. But I think it actually worked for both the TV audience and the book audience, because for the book audience, at least for me, I started wondering what exact connections they were going to be drawing, and how they were going to how are we going to bring Ned back into this episode. And, I mean, sort of oddly, they didn't. In the end, I was sort of wondering why they stuck him at the beginning, but we can get to that later. But I really thought it worked. It got my wheels spinning, if nothing else. And that's something that Steve did a really good job of for book readers, by both deviating from the books themselves and encouraging us to start trying to draw connections, even between something as otherwise innocuous as previously on.
Right.
I thought that was very well done. But we should, get to the actual beginning of the episode, the credits. No, I'm fucking kidding. We ought to get to the Tommen's crowning.
Right.
What'd you think?
Well, I mean, okay. So I liked that we got sort of more of the seven and what they represent, kind of fleshing that out for the audience. That's something that is and will be important. The fact that he's proclaimed by the High Septon as king, as a book reader, that kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit, but I think I see how they're going to do that. I really like the bit in which sort of everyone's sighing with relief that this isn't Joffrey. And Marjorie's making eyes with Tommen, and he's responding, and Cersei stands in the way, like the embodiment of Nemesis. And then kind of comes over to Marjorie vaguely like a shark moving through the water. And initially, I really didn't like the interaction between Cersei and Marjorie, because I felt it seemed very inconsistent with what has been going before, in terms of Cersei has always been against the Tyrell match. And you'd think, if she's in this mode of, execute Tyrion for killing my son, then this sudden kind of turnaround didn't really make very much sense. But I've since heard two theories that I think help me sort of understand this scene a little bit better, and I think I like it a little bit more. One theory is that this is all about the trial, that Cersei is playing nice in order to get Mace Tyrell's vote as one of the three judges to execute Tyrion. Which, if that's the case, I'm still a little bit unsatisfied with, in that I don't think that Cersei was really pushing very hard. The other theory that I kind of like a little bit more is that at the same time, Cersei is also trying to figure out whether there were any other conspirators. so that her talking bad about Joffrey was an attempt to elicit from Marjorie a response that would either sort of confirm or deny whether Marjorie was one of Tyrion's co-conspirators. What do you think?
Well, that fits actually into what I was thinking, and I was sort of waiting to let you play that out to see if you sort of, if we had sort of the same thing on this. And honestly, I think Cersei, at this point, for the first time in a long time, doesn't know what she's doing at all. And so the idea that she's feeling Marjorie out to see if she was potentially part of a conspiracy with Tyrion actually fits pretty well in that she is in intelligence gathering mode, because for the first time in a long time, she's not the one with her, playing puppet master with everyone. Jaime is defying her. Her father is being heavy-handed. She thinks Tyrion may have had something to do with Joffrey. I think she's really just, and the only thing the corollary I was thinking of is that I think it's in season 4 or 5 of that BBC show MI5, where one of the agents gets completely cut off from MI5 and believes and has no idea who is actually current and who has already been triple crossed or is a triple crosser, and he does the exact same thing. He starts going around asking all these questions, trying to look like he still knows what he's talking about, but is clearly in intelligence gathering mode. You just made it sound much more strategic than I would. I would say she doesn't have a clue what's going on anymore.
Well, I guess if it's more she doesn't have a clue, then I feel like that seems inconsistent with her scene with Tywin later on. And certainly, if that's the case, I think it's worse writing than I thought it was. Because at this point in time, Cersei should have a very clear idea of what she wants.
I think she has a clear idea of what she wants, but no longer a clear idea how to get it. And I mean, I shouldn't say that because if you're not a book reader, I mean if she were a bicycle and she had training wheels on, they would be about to come off. I guess
Right. Things are getting more complicated.
Yeah, and possibly beyond her ability to handle them in the way that she had been able to previously.
Okay, so shall we talk about this, the scene in Meereen now, or do we have more on this?
Well, I mean, we can move on to Meereen because we're treading in the same water with Dany and Darius and her council.
Yeah.
And Mormont. So what do you think? But first of all, and sent me an email and asked me to ask you to specify exactly how Mormont knows what he's talking about in this scene. Like,
okay.
You want to know the actual path?
Falling off the screen. Okay, there you go. So, I mean, how he knows what he knows? Well, in one sense, this comes to the problem that the two storylines, the Westeros and Essos, aren't necessarily on the same timeline. So this could be a month after Joffrey's death over in Essos, but not a month after in the case of Tommen. And then there's the fact that there's a certain spider that Jorah was communicating with way back in Season 1, who happens to have a very good communication network. That wasn't my biggest thing with this scene. I mean, okay, to be fair to the showrunners, I think this is the most difficult part of the adaptation job that they are going to have to deal with. That, this is the Meereenese knot that George R. R. Martin struggled with for years on end. And especially for the show, given that, spoilers, she decides to stay in Meereen, how do you make that stasis, the act of staying in place, dramatic? And it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with it. My bigger issue was just the fact that for whatever reason they give her Dario gives her a navy of 93 ships. I thought was kind of confusing because it seems to eliminate a source of tension. and sort of remove one more reason why Daenerys isn't going to Westeros. I did think that, honestly, Jorah's motivations here seemed rather back and forth. That in public, he's not in favor of going, even though, like, in Season 3, he was very much in favor of going. And then in private, he changes his mind. I wasn't really sure what they were doing. I do like that they've complicated the story with the sort of Yunkai has risen again, Astapor has been overthrown, so it's not just this sort of triumphal march that, now Dany is facing a real difficulty of, how do you actually carry through a revolution?
It's almost as if all of her work is being unwritten.
Yeah, I mean, my only complaint about that would be it was a little bit sort of telling rather than showing.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was. In fact, I have it written down here. It was in a sentence, right? Yunkai reigned slave, Astapor the throne, Cleon, yada yada. And
I would have even had messengers come in from, or refugees from Yunkai, or ambassador from Cleon the Butcher. I felt like that would have made it better. Even though it'd still be telling, it would... You know what I mean?
Yeah, although that could end up being a little too comedic to have, Messenger 1 come in, Yunkai, and then Messenger 2 from, and then Messenger 3, and as they come in, finally, Dany would be like, oh, what the fuck, another messenger? Let me guess. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Another one of my cities has been re-enslaved. I sort of don't know how they're going to handle all of this because so much nothing is going to be happening with the Meereen plot, and that's not really a spoiler. She's going to be there for a while, and I'm not sure how they're going to make it interesting without introducing, I don't know, something to make it more tense other than Dany overestimators her own appeal.
Yeah.
I don't know how they're gonna keep that up. So maybe actually condensing it into a few lines of exposition is the way to go to keep the plot moving.
I don't know. The question is what happens with Season 5. I think that's going to be the big testing ground of whether or not they can jump that hurdle and find a way to make Meereen more interesting. Should we move on to the
Littlefinger and
Vale?
Yeah. Go on.
I mean, I actually liked Baelish's kind of little talk to Sansa outside the Bloody Gate. Although I felt the set itself looked a little bit chintzy, like a little bit cheap.
I actually thought it looked okay. It was, the shots were mostly tight on the two of them as they were conversing, and they only panned back.
I meant the set itself.
Yeah. I thought the acting looked cheap, and we can discuss this, but Baelish is reaching comic book villain proportions, for me at least. He's become a sort of, he's always obviously been involved in the sex position, but now he's involved in sort of he should be in a much more teacherly mode, much like, Mormont was with Dany in season.
Teacherly mode.
I know, but he wasn't good at it. Know your
strengths, use them wisely.
I know, but he was...
There was even a parallel between the Dany scene and this scene, where he's saying, in this place, 10,000 men, or one man, and he's the one man, and Dany's the 10,000. I thought that was rather clever.
I don't know. I guess the acting is putting me off. It just doesn't sound convincing to me. He just sounds, and maybe they'll play with this later in terms of his overconfidence, and you only tell Batman about the pit full of sharps armed with lasers when you already know you're going to kill him. But there was a lot of that there, and I didn't see sort of this as a big pedagogical moment. It seemed a lot more like gloating, especially with what happened subsequently in the Eyrie with Littlefinger and Lisa.
Okay. Except the problem is, all of that's in the books. Like, one of the criticisms of Littlefinger that annoys me the most is people say, oh, in the books he's so fucking subtle. Bullshit! In the books, Littlefinger is a mustache-twirling Bond villain who can't stop making dick jokes all the time. Like, he is the least unsubtle person there you can think of. So I think he's actually being played absolutely straight. This is what Littlefinger is. He is someone who no one would ever... What?
Maybe it just doesn't come as cross as well on screen. Because it didn't bother me in earlier seasons, but it's starting to get to me. And maybe it's because of his isolation. Maybe it's because it's just him and Sansa, ever since he started dumping his compatriots overboard, that it's starting to bother me a little more. But again, it's something I could easily see being redeemed if this overconfidence is part of some larger narrative arc with him.
Okay.
I'm trying to say without getting into spoiler territory, but should we talk about Robin? Isn't he awesome?
Yeah, let's talk about, just weird. I mean, everything, what is the right way to put it? It's like almost Lynchian, It's like the normal human wiring of interaction in Lysa and Robin's brains is not there. And, like, you could see it in, like, the way he was interacting with Sansa, where he was, like, very nonchalantly talking about, the death of both of their fathers, and then, Peter gives him a gift, and he chucks it down the moon door, and you're just like, these people aren't right. There's something wrong with them.
And it's not something, I mean, it's not like with Joffrey where you thought that he was just sort of born wrong and sociopathic. Here, it does seem to be a function of their isolation. And that Robin has never had a chance to actually learn what it was like to be a social animal. And he has a certain... Go on.
I mean, Rickon is feral, but there's something about the way that kid acts that actually reminds me of, like, video footage I've seen of feral children.
Once they got language under their belt and then just sort of asked for everything immediately, if not sooner. It's just...
Right.
But also, it's the way in which... I guess it sort of does sound like he's a sociopath. The way he's just totally unaware of the conventions that he's violating, to the point to where, he can't even recognize any sort of social norm that his statements that he's continuing to make violate. But his mother's not any better, so I can't say it's not socialized into him.
Yeah, I mean, she's slightly more socialized. But, the scene where she's essentially sexually assaulting Littlefinger, and, she's paranoid and jealous, and she immediately brings up the Jon Arryn thing, and she's bringing in a priest and telling him that she's going to scream when she's having sex. It's just like, she is...
Assault.
Fixated.
Yeah.
I think it's the right word.
On her own, fixated.
Like,
on
she
her
is
own
so fixated. Yes?
Oh, fixated on her own pleasure, or at least what she imagines it to be.
Well, on her obsession with Littlefinger, that to her, Littlefinger is so important, so crucial to her life, that she has murdered her husband. She has done the one thing, that is kind of the most primal overturning of, supposedly a sacred relationship that, And my only hope is that this scene hit show watchers with the force that it's supposed to, because for all that people are seeming to think of Littlefinger as a comic book villain, he's also a comic book villain who is revealed to be responsible for the entirety of the War of Five Kings.
Yeah.
That's a hell of an accomplishment.
And I actually got sort of attacked for claiming that Littlefinger clearly had a hand in Aaron's death, or was at least claiming responsibility, Al-Qaeda-like, in the way that they claim responsibility for everything. But we now have a number of deaths on his head that he's.
I don't think.
Go on.
Well, I don't think claiming is the right word for it. I mean, we get absolute confirmation.
Yeah.
Lysa poisoned her husband at Littlefinger's command.
That's what I got out of it too. But so many people told me I was wrong. I lost a little confidence. Okay, good. You're all wrong, motherfuckers. I was right.
Okay.
Yeah, he's. I mean, he gave her the instructions about how to poison him. So that means, I mean, how many people do we have on Littlefinger's head now? Ned, Joffrey, Jon. I mean, sort of direct.
Everyone else who died in the War of Five Kings.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people.
And I think this is a point a lot of people probably did miss if they're not book readers, because they didn't start the music, they didn't start that. It was a small moment, and it was immediately followed by a very uncomfortable moment of Sansa listening to, Littlefinger and Lights Out Sex, which could have overwhelmed the import of what they had just seen. I mean, because we're cringing as much as she is.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I was just thinking, I kind of wish they'd kept the line in the book where one of the things that Lysa is screaming while they're having sex is, "Peter, give me a baby," over and over again, and it adds another layer of creep.
Whew, that might have just been a little too much. I mean, I was already trying to sink it. But from there we moved to Tywin and Cersei, the conversation we alluded to earlier. Iron Bank is coming back. Apparently money is an issue for the Lannisters.
Okay, so, again, if Cersei's, acceptance of the weddings is her attempt to play nice with Tywin in order to get him to vote her way, I buy that. What I don't buy is that the Westerlands are tapped out. That makes no sense. And the only reason I can think to have that there is just to make the Iron Bank as thuddingly obvious as it has to be.
And I think that might actually be the exact reason, because it has not really been it's been mentioned offhandedly by some characters in previous seasons. They're going to need to start making that a little more obvious for show watchers.
Right, but I just don't know if they need to make... I mean, it would be kind of a big deal if the Westerlands were tapped out. That's one of the major regions of Westeros where the economy has suddenly collapsed.
It's like there's
it doesn't make any... Yeah, but it doesn't make any fucking sense in the sense that, okay, so Robb just spent a season sacking the Westerlands. You'd think he'd notice that the mines didn't have any gold in them when he robbed them. And you'd think that he would tell people, why would the Tyrells ally with the Lannisters if they knew that the Lannisters were broke? The gold is the one thing the Lannisters have going for them. And the other thing is, how did Tywin and all of his bannermen finance, at this point, years of war on empty mines? It just doesn't make any sense. I didn't think it was necessary.
But it did do the job of reminding us of the Iron Bank and Bravos. but that scene, I haven't really been happy with any of the scenes with Tywin and Cersei really this season, but because what is he doing there? Is he humbling her? Is he teaching her? I mean, what's actually going?
I didn't have so much of a problem from his angle that he was trying to educate her on the stakes of what was going on and the necessity for the Tyrell alliance. And that would be fine, except that Cersei is not presenting an objection to the Tyrell alliance. So that was kind of... It felt like he was pushing against an open door.
Like that old Far Side cartoon, except the opposite. And then while we're looking at Cersei's face, before we actually cut away, we start to hear the war prayer, or whatever you would like to call it, the hit list. And I like the overlap. That was a nice use of non-diegetic sound. And I also like the fact that Arya makes her intentions clear again.
Right.
As to who's on the list.
Yeah, and I felt like it was a good scene in terms of it was a good interaction between the Hound and Arya, but also showing very much that there's not a possibility for a long-term functional partnership here.
Or that there's only a possibility for it. I have this idea that they could do spin-offs now of both the Hound and Arya and Pod and Brienne. They could have these the adventures do little mini webisodes of these people just going out and interacting with her, because there is a lot of charm in their interactions, right? Mm-hmm. We're both going to bed. Oh, by the way, you're next, right? Or don't forget, you're on the list. And I know I'm getting a little ahead with the Brienne and Pod, but I really like, just in terms of sort of basic character development, without actually their plot going very far, keeping them in sort of the forefront of our minds as the show is moving along. Moving along back to a creepy place with Sansa and Lisa again.
And the lemon cakes. Okay, for one thing, I thought it was a little bit strange about the reversing of the of which of the Tully sisters used to gain weight, but that's completely a book reader thing that no one should care about. The main thing is, I thought Lysa was really good in this scene as someone who can hold together the not being crazy for about 5 minutes, and then just everything starts pouring out. That she is so obsessed about Littlefinger that every other woman around her is an object of fear and suspicion and envy and jealousy. And that, all of a sudden Sansa, who thought, at long last that she was in a safe place, a protected place, now realizes that she is in just as big danger as she was in King's Landing.
And this is...
the first time that Sansa takes a more active role in playing the Game of Thrones, in that she is constructing a brand new scenario in which Littlefinger dislikes her, and she's selling it to Lysa, and that works, except now she's going to get engaged to feral child Robin Arryn.
Well, I think one thing that we should note, because we've had this teased now in 2 previous episodes, and it'll be teased again at the end of this one. There's a potential for a Stark to be reunited with a blood relative, right? This is actually the only one we get, right, since the end of season 1.
Right.
Except for, obviously Cat and Rob are out there, but in terms of the ones who have been distant, like, we could have a sort of family reunion, and it goes like
the
that.
refugees.
Yes, it's really, lemons. This is what's going to push you over the lemons. Which also had this oddly Dornish thing in my head because of what happened in previous episodes. But I know that's not the right banner, but I thought, like, wow, this is going awful. Like, this could not go any worse for Sansa.
We'll see in episode 7.
Okay. I don't know that yet. No spoilers, eh? But yeah, the girl, you'll. There was. What did he do to your body, to your beautiful young body? And it's just like,
yeah.
You've now tipped the rocker over. You're on the floor, continuing to try to rock it, and it's not working. It's again, it's another brilliantly done, incredibly uncomfortable moment in an episode full of them.
Right.
But fortunately, it transitions to one that's not uncomfortable at all, which is the aforementioned Brienne and Pod spinoff.
Right.
Which is just a lovely little moment. Do you know how to ride a horse? Yes. I've done it once before. And
it was nice. I mean, the one thing I'd sort of point out that's important plot-wise is that they've decided to go to the wall. Don't know if they'll ever get there, but, it's interesting. I thought, it as a sort of paired with the next scene with Pod and Brienne, I thought it did the business of establishing this odd couple and then getting them to a place of understanding rather well.
Absolutely, and in terms of how it was filmed, it was pure old school comedy. Keep the camera focused on Brienne and that look she has on her face as Pod is weaving the horse back and forth on and off camera behind her. But there's a look of. It's the same look that she often used to give with Jaime too. Like I'm really upset, I'm annoyed, but I sort of like this. I appreciate the company. And they're on their way to Castle Black, so nothing possibly bad could happen to them.
Yeah. And then we get Arya practicing the water dancing, which I thought was beautifully blocked. It just that little sequence just looked gorgeous.
It reminded me a lot of that old Christian Bale film. What is it? Equilibrium. The one that had
Equilibrium.
With all the gun kata stuff. It had that sort of feel, somewhere between that and Avatar: The Last Airbender, where the water dancing, obviously, but I thought it was really well done. I liked the fact that Syria was back, even if he was not treated well, or his memory was not treated very well.
Another sort of emphasis on Bravos coming in once again.
Yeah. And also the sort of reputation of everything that Syria taught her about how to fight. You get the sense the Hound would have died, possibly, with the Lannister Knights. It had been him instead of Syria.
Sure. If Arya had a little bit more muscle strength to put behind that thrust, Yeah. Hello?
But one of the things I liked about this episode... Go on?
Go ahead. Finish your thoughts. No, you finish your thoughts. I'll chime in after.
This is another moment in the episode where I thought that we were going to get less nudity, more cursing. It seemed very, very much... Because I still remember when I told my students when I was teaching season 1 that one of the remarkable things is that there were no curse words at the point that I said it, and then there was one, and now the Hound he can't stop. I mean,
unloads.
But you were going to say?
Well, I was going to say speaking of our earlier discussion of the previously on. This was a great example of next week on really fucking with the viewer, because I think they used some sort of different sound effect for the preview, because in the preview it really looked like she'd stabbed him in the guts.
Yeah.
And clearly that's not what happened.
But I mean, we're not quite to like Mad Men levels of cryptic previews where it's door slams. What? Who's there? Trash can.
I mean,
Like where,
I wouldn't say cryptic as much as misleading.
yeah. I think this was
But
deliberate. I think
the-
actually it's intended to say absolutely nothing. Everyone will turn in a direction and say, "Huh? What?"
Right.
Which tells you absolutely nothing.
Yeah. So moving on to Oberyn and Cersei, and I've kind of like already said what I thought in that, if this is just about Cersei trying to get his support, I felt like she was beating around the bush too much and not really kind of pushing her case out there. If, on the other hand, this was also her trying to figure out if he'd had some hand in her son's death, then I kind of liked it a little bit better. But I did like the mention of his daughters, the Sand Snakes, because I honestly thought we were not going to see them in the show. So that's kind of interesting.
I wrote snakes on a plane when I saw it. They just mentioned the planes in Dorne, and I was like, then the snakes come up. Come on, it's snakes on a plane. I did not make that pun up. That it was there in the show.
All right.
But I also liked the discussion of the daughters, the idea that we don't hurt little girls in Dorne. And Cersei gets in what struck me as one of the few like really, I would say, earnest notes in this episode, which was everywhere in the world they hurt little girls.
Yeah.
And that little note of self-pity struck me as the first time she wasn't trying to gather intelligence in the episode.
Yeah, she did feel more genuine here.
Absolutely. And then we get back to Pod and Brienne, and you'll notice that as we've been building through this episode, lots of pairs, and I didn't want to talk too much about the use of two shots, but there are a lot of them in this, right? There are a lot of uses of the two characters on screen, be it Pod and Brienne, be it Cersei and Oberyn, going back to Pod and Brienne, Arya and the Hound, Tywin and Cersei, Littlefinger and Sansa. Sansa, and it's a weird way to create the appearance of alliance, because what it does is create the impression of chaos. That everyone is talking to everyone, they're pairing up, and for most of these pairs, it's just two people. So Pod and Brienne, Arya and the Hound, but it's Cersei and everyone. And she seems to be getting spread a little thin. So in terms of your visual memory of the episode, you come away with it, Cersei seems to be flailing, looking for that one perfect person to talk to that everyone else seems to have, like Pod and Brienne.
I see. Okay, yeah, I kind of like that. So speaking of Pod and Brienne, sorry, Pod, yeah. I thought the bit with the rabbit on fire was funny, but I did like that they kind of, in two scenes get from "I don't want you around me" to like, "I see that you have some value," and some sort of modus vivendi having been worked out, which was nice. I thought it was good, sort of efficient filmmaking.
And she's, and we saw this, when she went and talked to the Tyrells in the previous episode, but she's actually trying now, which I don't think she had ever done before. And it just sort of makes her a little more appealing as a character. And then we get to not trying at all, by which I mean Craster's Keep.
Yeah, so I have to say, I was incredibly skeptical about where they were going with this, and then very pleasantly surprised. A few quibbles aside, I thought it was actually a really well-worked-out sequence. It kind of gave Jon something kind of heroic to do in between the beginning of the season and the end of the season. I thought it gave Bran more of an actual dramatic storyline where he's making a choice here. They kind of in a way, this is sort of a retread of the similar scene from season 3, in which Bran, Mira, Jojen, etc. are up in the tower and Jon's right outside.
Yeah, well,
but
it's almost an exact answer.
But because they didn't focus on the emotional connection of that moment, that in the earlier sequence, in the books, one of the big emphases is that Bran is making a choice to stay silent rather than reach out to his brother.
Yeah.
And that didn't really come across in the show in season 3. And here, he's making much more of a choice. He's choosing his sort of mystical destiny over his family.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to get at. The only thing I would add to that is that in making that choice, he does make some other questionable choices.
Yes, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, but
yeah.
No, it was getting a little choppy. I was saying, go on.
Okay, so some things I noticed. One, there was a weird sort of, I don't know, non-continuity, I guess, in the fact that Locke creeps in very cautiously, and then when it comes for the actual fight, the Night's Watchman basically charge in screaming, and that's not much of a sneak attack.
Well,
so I thought that was
numbers, right? It's they should have all been one-on-one, and a bunch of them just sort of sat aside and let Jon do the killing.
Well, and the fact that it was supposed to be 6 men against 11, or something like that, and somehow it turned into more like 20 on 20. If you just count the people who are in the fight, the numbers double. But I guess they were looking for more drama there. I really liked the stuff with Jojen. I thought that was impressively spooky and otherworldly in a way that we hadn't really gotten that much with Bran before.
I'd agree, and I think it was a nice sort of addition to the end of the previous episode, where we were also getting kind of spooky and atmospheric without it kind of moving into sort of fantasy corniness. It was, and I think actually what you were alluding to earlier with, and I hadn't thought about this till right this second, so if I'm completely wrong, just smack me down. But when you were talking about David Lynch earlier, it's that kind of creepiness. It's not the kind of what's around the corner creepiness. It's the sort of unsettling. I don't know what these relations mean anymore. I don't know what's going on. Everything seems a little bit disconnected in the same way that it did with Robin and Lysa. That there's just something not inhuman, but unsocialized and unhuman, I guess would be a way to put it, about Jojen in these scenes. And
yeah, I mean, the way that he's interacting with Bran, he's almost sort of like a mentor/tempter figure here. He's the one saying, yes, go into Hodor if you need to, or more subtly, if the rest of us have to die in order for you to get to the tree, you're going to have to do that. And ultimately, the fact that Jojen knows when he's going to die is one of the more unhuman things about him.
You almost get a sense that if they cut away to Tyrion dancing and telling us that sometimes he talks backwards, that wouldn't be entirely out of place. That was a Twin Peaks reference for those of you who. Yeah. But it's right in the, if a man in a cowboy hat appears and has a strange Southern accent, it's gotten to that level, and I appreciate that more than the sort of mundane creepiness of horror, and or that they sort of went with just at the very end of the last episode with the crown and
Yeah, I mean, Jojen's hand on fire
yeah.
was a lot more impressive, honestly, than some of the stuff in the previous episode.
Absolutely.
There was something genuinely, and actually an interesting contrast here would be with Melisandre. Like, the scene of him seeing his hand on fire was honestly a lot more mystical and otherworldly than anything they've been doing with Melisandre to date.
I'd agree with that entirely. That's I hadn't even thought about it in those terms. Of yes, that's they need Michelle MacLaren directing those episodes too. I think because Jojen is what Melisandre should be, and the fact that she hasn't been is I think what has detracted from that storyline a lot.
Yeah. So let's talk about Bran warging into Hodor and killing a man.
Needed to happen. It was terrible. And the show has been sort of dogged by conversations about not handling rape well, and this is another example or not another example of them not handling it. This is an example of them actually showing the
violation.
The violation. I don't want to say from the rapist's perspective, although it sort of is, which is creepy, but I don't think it's in any way sort of glorifying what Bran does. No one who watches that episode is going to walk away thinking, wow, it'd be really cool if I could do that to my friends. But it is, I think what it does a good job of something that his master tried to teach him in I think it was season 1, where he was trying to teach him how to lead, and sometimes you have to make hard choices. It's when he was still running Winterfell, and there were people petitioning Bran, and
that would be season 2.
Season 2, and Bran didn't like the idea of having to make difficult decisions if people he believed were innocent would be hurt by them. And this isn't just a person he believes to be innocent. This is someone who I think we can legitimately say he loves. He knows to be innocent and would do anything for him, except he knows Hodor doesn't want him to do this. But
and I think it points to something in Hodor, is that he is someone who is genuinely capable of snapping a man's neck like a chicken, but he's also someone who would never want to do that.
Yeah.
And so the shot of him staring at the blood on his hands, literally, really kind of takes you back.
I mean, he's so abused in these scenes because it's also suggested that outside of when they warg into the direwolves, that there is something about the warger that's superior to the wargie. Like mentally, in terms of capacity, and that Hodor can function as a vessel, even though Bran is still learning how to do this because of his lack of facilities, or faculties, sorry. And that is also disturbing. But all of these things just, I think, add to the sort of heartbreak in the decision to have Bran do this. But fortunately, the episode is saved by a boy and his dog.
Well, okay, so a few things first. The next bit is, Bran crawling towards Jon, calling out to him, and then having to make a choice not to, which I thought was done very well. The fight between Jon and the Legend of Jin Alley, the actual fight itself was a little bit stagey.
Yeah, close quarter blocking in. But I.
Yeah, but I really liked that it was ultimately, it was the victim of abuse who saved the day. If that woman hadn't stabbed him between the shoulder blades, Jon is dead, and, game over for our heroes. But here, she saves Jon, and then Jon returns the favor, which I thought kind of redeemed a little bit kind of some of the rapey nastiness of the previous episode.
Yeah, I sort of wish they'd kept Burn Gorman around a little bit longer. The guy playing Carl, the Legend of Janelle, he's becoming this generation's Tim Roth, in that he plays all of the villains. We just started watching.
Over on AMC.
Yeah, he's playing essentially the same character, just in a red coat. Right down to being holed up in enemy territory with murderous things and doing horrible things, desecrating. I mean, but it was good to see him die, as it always is.
Yeah. And then I liked, Rast's death felt very horror movie-esque, like down to the look to the right of the screen. No, it's actually coming to the left.
Yeah.
That was good. And then, like you said, Jon finally gets reunited with Ghost, and that's more screen time than the two of them have had in 2 seasons.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it was a little bit. I wrote down here, and I don't know why I'm with the bad puns today, but Canis ex machina. I mean, right? I know I'm terrible today. Just feel free to leave nasty comments, but Ghost comes out of nowhere. He's out of the cave, he's. And then he literally comes flying in.
Well, that's very much a Chekhov's direwolf.
Yeah.
Like, if you put a direwolf cage in the first act, he's going to be out of the cage in the third act.
Yes, he's gonna go off the third end, but it was a nice little touching moment, a boy and his dog, and it maybe makes us forget about all of the incredible creepy things that we've seen. I mean, basically, of all of the sort of creepiest encounters and exchanges in the show, this probably contained the most since Lysa breastfeeding Robin in front of the court ages ago. I mean, this was just.
And I will say that, I like the fact that the abused women of Craster's Keep ultimately decide not to go back with the Night's Watch. That was kind of a good, realistic moment that this isn't just a heroic narrative, that these women have no reason to trust anyone wearing the uniform of the Night's Watch.
Oh, absolutely.
And that, Jon has accomplished a necessary thing, perhaps a morally necessary thing. The way that they frame burning Craster's Keep, it's like it's a physical place of evil that has to be eliminated, wiped off the face of the earth. Here is one place in the world where little girls will no longer be harmed.
Hopefully they took all the pork that was hidden in it out beforehand. But
but at the same time, like, it's not something that it doesn't. There's no return to normal. There's no return to the heroic sort of status quo in which, once the bad guy is defeated, all signs of him ever having existed vanish with him. There is still, a legacy from this.
There's a legacy of victimhood.
There's a legacy of victimhood, and 5 Night's Watchmen have died. That's 5 Night's Watchmen who aren't going to be there when Mance Rayder comes calling. They killed 11 Night's Watchmen. So, the moral victory here is that they've murdered their brothers who murdered their other brothers. It's a little bit more complicated, but in a good way. Like, not in a, bad 90s comic, dark equals more mature, but actually thinking through what
I
realism should mean.
And I think that's one of the things that when these conversations about how rape and violence is depicted on the show crop up, and there was a terrible article in Salon about just this earlier this week. Was it Salon or Slate? One of them. It was very contrarian.
I think you may be thinking of the New York Times article.
Was it the New York Times?
Because the New York Times came out with a really bad article.
About how the depictions of violence are going to necessarily increase, and the sex of violence. I mean, they basically, put Game of Thrones atop slippery slope.
Oh, no, sorry.
By this time next year...
So I'm thinking, we're thinking about 2 different articles then.
Yeah, I think this one was in Salon. Well, whatever, it was terrible. And one of the reasons is it sort of pretends that Deadwood didn't exist. So if you're really going to complain about sexualized violence... and you think that we're on a slippery slope and Game of Thrones is somehow on top of it. No, because one of the things, and I think actually this is true of Deadwood too, is that the show is very much about the consequences of these violent actions. Ned's death, as gruesome as it wasn't just for shock value. It wasn't just, I mean, we're not talking about torture porn here. This isn't Saw, or Saw 2, or Saw 3, or, I mean, the violence has real repercussions. And so as you were talking about, the realism of having Craster's wives disperse as opposed to accompanying their, knights in black linen back to the wall, I think it's a part of it that, rape, torture are things that you don't just go, oh, you saved me, therefore I will go along with you. Now you please don't.
They don't exist anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the sort of other thing I'll sort of say in this is, look, there's the old saw, depiction is not endorsement, but it's always important to look at, again, the degree of consequences. Bad things happen on this show, but except for, and I would still argue, except for the scene between Jaime and Cersei, when horrible things happen on this show, they're done by horrible people who the heroes are supposed to oppose. And the consequences are always shown as very real and very profound. And that's different from, say, to use a similar work from the fantasy genre, the Sword of Truth series, which uses sexual violence in a fetishized way.
I'm not familiar.
Well, thank God, your life is substantially improved by not being familiar with the series. But I'm just saying, I don't think you can do an honest reading of either the books or most of the show and argue that this is an endorsement.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And
okay.
I will be until next week. We apologize for the delay in getting this one up. It will be up, or you'll be able to watch this on, we'll say Friday, probably late Thursday night. And we will try to have this to you, though, as per the previous episode, on Monday evening next week. And this has been another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast on Game of Thrones with Scott R. Kaufman and
Steve Atwell.
And we will see you next week.